Hello, and thank you for joining our Colorado Stream Health Assessment Framework webinar. I am your host, Abby Burke, the Western Rivers Program Lead for Audubon Rockies, a regional office of the National Audubon Society. Audubon Rockies places high priority on stream management plans. We believe stream management plans can be a critical element in effective community building and river protection. In conversation with folks across the state, there seems to be a feeling of celebration around the Colorado Water Plan's Stream Management Plan measurable objective, which is to cover 80% of the locally prioritized lists of rivers with stream management plans by 2030. Accompanied with this celebration is possibly a slight disorientation of where to begin and how to proceed. And in that light, it is my privilege to welcome and introduce to you our presenters today, Mark Beardsley of Ecometrics and Dr. Brad Johnson of Johnson Environmental Consulting. Our presenters will guide us in the newly developed Colorado Stream Health Assessment Framework, which is a holistic health assessment tool for stream management and restoration planning. Thank you both for sharing your time and expertise with us today. And for the audience, I would like to share with you a bit of background about our presenters. Mark's experience is grounded in a diverse educational and practical background. He holds BS degrees in chemistry and biology, an MS in ecology, and supplemental studies in environmental philosophy and mathematics, along with more than 20 years hands-on field experience as a stream, riparian, and wetlands scientist. Mark specializes in interpreting scientific data to assess the functional condition of streams and wetlands and to evaluate the effectiveness of restoration and mitigation. He is a leader in the development, testing, and implementation of Colorado's FAC-WET, FAC-STREAM, and Colorado Stream Health Assessment Framework functional assessment methods, and is well-versed in all of the common ecological and geomorphic assessment frameworks. As a freelance scientist and principal of Ecometrics, Mark designed and carried out ecological research projects, hundreds of site-scale assessments, watershed inventories, and stream and wetland restoration projects that use natural approaches. Dr. Brad Johnson, after completing undergraduate work in botany at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, Brad went on to complete his master's, doctorate, and postdoctorate fellowship at Colorado State University studying wetland ecology and functioning. Brad's research since then has focused on ecological health assessment at multiple scales and wetland restoration, particularly for use as Clean Water Act compensatory mitigation. Brad was a research scientist in the Department of Biology at Colorado State University for 16 years, where he carried out a long-term program developing technical tools for wetland, stream, and watershed health assessment designed for use in the Clean Water Act Section 404 program. Now that this research has yielded a complete health assessment toolbox, Brad and his company, Johnson Environmental Consulting, are shifting their attention to bringing that assessment technology to bear on questions of water and stream management. Most recently, Brad was the technical lead on the development of the City of Fort Collins Poudre River Health Assessment Framework, which adapted functional assessment of Colorado streams to meet the management needs of the City of Fort Collins. It has been my privilege to work with both of our presenters in trainings and in the field. I'm sure you will enjoy today's webinar and learn new tools for stream health assessment and restoration planning. So let's get right to it since we have a lot to present to you today. Mark, can you please advance one slide? Your audio lines have been muted since we have a very large number of participants today. We will engage questions after the main presentation of today's webinar, so please use the chat feature on your screen to type your messages or questions directly to me, and you can do this throughout the session. So thanks again for joining, and let's dive in. Mark and Brad, when you are ready, please go ahead with today's presentation.
Great, this is Brad. I'll be starting off today, and I just want, first off, to check, can you hear me and everything, Abby?
Yep, you sound great.
Okay, super. Well, thanks everybody for tuning in, and especially thanks to Abby for organizing this and Audubon for hosting it. We're really excited to have the opportunity to talk about this new tool that we've developed for health assessment and stream management planning. First thing I wanted to mention, if people have noticed, there's been a small name change since the original announcement was sent out, and just wanted to talk about that just for just a second. And that really speaks to what a work in progress the health assessment framework really is. So we changed the name for a few reasons. The first was to better convey the scope of what we were looking at. So originally the river health assessment framework, and we wanted to make sure that people understood it wasn't just for large rivers. It could be used on any size water body. We also wanted to acknowledge the state of Colorado, who supported the development of the assessment framework, and as well as the EPA State Wetlands Program. So we wanted to make sure that Colorado was in the name. And then finally, we wanted to avoid confusion with the City of Fort Collins River Health Assessment Framework. Like Abby just said, we were involved in developing that, and we actually named them the same at first. We thought that would engender consistency, but it turned out it seemed like it was going to engender confusion more than anything. So we changed the name. Anyways, I'm going to start off with a little bit of background information, which will be very remedial to some people, but I just want to make sure that we are all starting on the same page. So where are we going? Of course, we're going to go to Colorado. Next, we're going to talk about streams, Colorado streams and their management. Then we're going to talk about stream health and stream health assessment. And finally, we're going to talk about the stream health assessment framework. So we're basically going to let the framework be our outline for our talk. Colorado. For the people who live here, which is probably most of you, you know this. Colorado is pretty much the bomb when it comes to a place to live. There's about everything that we want to do here if you like outdoor activities and other activities as well. And if you notice, one common theme in all these pictures, aside from people having fun, is that they all involve water in some state or another. And if we're talking about water in Colorado, we're indirectly or directly talking about rivers. The other thing we know for the people who live here is that Colorado's population can be described no other way aside from skyrocketing. When I moved here in 1990, there was about 3.3 million people. 2014, 5.3 million. So 65% increase. The common statistic that's given is that Colorado's 2010 population will double by 2050. So it's basically, it looks like an inevitability that there's going to be a lot more pressure being put on our rivers. Colorado's rivers, we are in a fortunate position to have many rivers which are natural or nearly natural. I'm going to remind everybody of the obvious here, but the one thing is that you only have one opportunity to keep a stream pristine. As soon as you get into the system, then it just comes down to the degree of impairment that the system has. The other thing about Colorado is that we're in a unique position in the country. We have that we hold the headwaters of 4 major river basins, and so this puts us in really unique circumstances where we have more river basins than any other state in the country, and so the actions that we have, the management actions that we undertake with these rivers, are literally seen from coast to coast. Some people don't need a lot of convincing that we need stream management plans, but there is some questions about it. Do we really need one? Can we manage on more of an ad hoc basis? I think we just have to look to the past to answer that kind of question. This is placer mining on the Middle Fork of the South Platte near Fairplay. These guys did not have a stream management plan, and I think this shows pretty clearly the way the society tends to treat rivers if left without guidance. Fortunately, the state agrees with this point of view, In 2015, the Colorado Water Plan came out. Now, honestly, I was prepared to be a little bit underwhelmed with the Colorado Water Plan. I get a lot of exposure to water development in Colorado, and those questions are just so slippery, so difficult. I was like, what are they going to really say? I figured it was going to be another bureaucratic paperweight with a lot of words and really little utility, but by gum, CWCB pulled it off, particularly with regard to planning the future and being realistic about uncertainties and the real challenges that we Coloradans will be facing in the really not too distant future. One of the things that's foundational to the plan with regard to water development and population increase is that Colorado is not going to stick its head in the sand, and it's going to face, in the face of future inevitabilities. Instead, we're going to plan stream management diligently instead of letting it happen on an ad hoc basis. Now, one of the things with the stream, with the Colorado Water Plan, is it does, of course, challenge Coloradans to come up with stream management plans, but it falls short of exactly how to go about doing that. What they do say is that a stream management plan should involve stakeholders. It should assess the existing biological, hydrological, and geomorphological conditions. And this is really the domain of the health assessment framework that we'll be talking about today. But it also suggests that flows and other physical conditions need to be identified which support environmental and recreational water uses. The health assessment framework can be used in that capacity as well. It's supposed to incorporate environmental and recreational values. The health assessment framework can be used to set those, to put those values in context. And finally, it should be used to, it should identify and prioritize alternative management actions to achieve measurable progress towards management objectives. I really like this list, one, because it legitimizes the value of recreation, and I really like to recreate. But in more general terms and in legal terms, it legitimizes non-consumptive uses of water for recreation, for fish habitat, etc. And this is a big advancement. You don't just have to use the water to the point that it disappears. You can use it for in ways that it's not consumed. So based in part on the Colorado Water Plan and our experience with stream management planning, we've modeled the process. And so at the most basic level, one can have stream needs, or they can define stream needs and people needs. Stream health assessments are used to define these needs. For people needs, it's stakeholder engagement. These two sources of information come together to form a list of alternatives. Those alternatives can be prioritized, and finally, they can be carried out as plans to be carried out as actions. Now, the efficacy of those actions is then evaluated through monitoring, and finally, we can come to conclusions about ecological and societal outcomes. Now, this information then feeds back to the stream needs through adaptive management, and we figure out whether or not further modifications of the system are needed. So here's our stream. In this system, a myriad of components and functions interact in very non-linear ways. Stream assessment and stream health is a very messy topic. There's nothing unidirectional or linear about stream health and functioning. Streams have needs, and the degree to which these myriad of components can interact more or less defines then the health of that system. On the other side, we have people needs. Things like water use, water quality, biodiversity, stability, recreation, and even aesthetics. Together, these people needs that are provided by natural systems are called ecosystem services. And the underscore here is that the stream provides these ecosystem services to society, and literally at no cost to society. But we always have to keep in mind this is a two-way street. And we need to preserve streams and their health so that we receive the goods and services that we expect from these systems. Now, I said that stream health is a myriad of components all interacting. And together, the composite of those components creates stream health. So if stream health is a holistic aspect of streams, so should stream health assessment. Now, single parameters can be measured, certainly, and they can provide a measure of stream dysfunction or ill health, but they'll never give you the complete picture of what stream health looks like. There's no such thing as a healthometer. You can just kind of plug in and get an answer. Management plans and assessments, which are based on one or just a few parameters, don't provide a clear idea of holistic system health. Basing management plans on just one or a few parameters can lead to unintended consequences, or in a worst case scenario, it can lead to cases where certain functions are maximized, or what I call the trap of functional maximization. Functional maximization is when one function is enhanced greatly, oftentimes, or the capacity of that function, but this always comes at the expense of other functions. I'm sure you'll see my point with this next couple slides. Here's a couple beautiful streams. These are classic examples of streams that a single function has been maximized. In this case, it's conveyance. In these two examples, functional maximization, but of stability, and in particular, resistance. So here's our stream again. The Colorado Stream Health Assessment Framework looks at all the fundamental drivers that control and influence stream health. When we go out and make a health assessment, what we need to do as assessors is to look at the stream through the lens of different scientific disciplines. Now notice the hydrology, hydraulics, geomorphology, physicochemistry, and biology. These are not functions, but rather these are sub-disciplines of science. And optimally, a stream assessment framework team has one evaluator from each of these sub-disciplines, or at least has expertise in all of these sub-disciplines. Together, looking at assessments like this through all these different sub-disciplines, we get integrated river science, as the Australians would say. And this is what we're going for, a holistic, comprehensive, integrated view of river health. I have a lot of experience with aquatic habitat assessment and trainings and teaching and whatnot. And the idea I get is that people think that stream assessment is some sort of magic trick, or that it's a special, unique snowflake that has to be approached from a completely different direction. And truly, nothing could be further from the further from the truth. We as humans, we've spent a lot of time developing diagnostic tools and diagnostic strategies and approaches. And one of the most obvious ones that we really like to borrow from in our stream health assessment is human health assessment. So the first thing is just making a comparison of organismal health, or human health, and river health. So first, health is the ability of an organism or one of its parts to perform its vital functions normally or properly. A healthy person has anatomic, physiologic, and psychological integrity, an ability to perform valued roles, and ability to deal with stress. We can use this exact same definition, but for rivers and streams. Stream health, the ability of a stream to perform its vital functions normally or properly. A healthy stream has structural, physical, and biological integrity. It has an ability to perform its valued roles, provide those ecosystem services. It has an ability to deal with stress. In this case, we usually call it resiliency. back around the turn of the millennium, the U.S. EPA came up with a level 1, 2, 3 assessment hierarchy to describe the intensity of assessment. And basically, they had level 1 was a remote or a desktop sort of assessment. Level 2 was an on-the-ground, in the field, but rapid assessment, spending less than half of a day out there collecting real information, but what you could get quickly. Finally, level 3 was an intensive level of assessment, collecting quantitative data. This same sort of data can be applied to the medical field and the collection of human health data. So we can have a basic interview, we can collect easily obtainable health information, quantitative in this case, but readily attainable. And finally, we can go to intensive measures. Now, the key here, and the way that we brought in the health diagnostic framework, is that in the US EPA 1, 2, 3, those levels are usually assigned to individual methodologies. For instance, one could talk about a level 2 rapid assessment. And the real advancement of the Colorado Stream Health Assessment Framework is that we use these 3 levels of information within an assessment, just like your doctor would do. They'd ask questions of you, take simple measures, and then if there's an issue, prescribe intensive diagnostic tools. No information is discarded, and you're not cubbyholed into developing data on just one basic level. So in this case, the doctor can provide a holistic health assessment using all of these levels of data. Just tell this guy how, hey, you're old, you have high blood pressure, and your knees are blown. Suddenly you have a holistic health assessment using multiple levels of data. And that's the same thing that happens on the ground in stream health assessment in practice. Stream health assessment is also an investigation. People have to realize that. In fact, that's one of the things that makes it really fun, is you're collecting clues. So what's Sherlock Holmes doing here? He's doing the same thing that these guys are doing. And so the Colorado Stream Health Assessment Framework uses the same investigative approach. It's a forensic approach based on using the best available evidence and best professional judgment. And based on the best available evidence, one makes a judgment or renders an opinion. I make this point, which seems a little bit obvious. Of course you render an opinion. But we've actually gotten quite a bit of pushback on the idea of rendering an opinion or a judgment. Again, this idea that people can take all this data and put it into this black box, this healthometer, and it spits out a number. But that doesn't work. It's not how any other diagnostic field works, not how your car mechanic diagnoses your engine problem. It's not how your doctor diagnoses a health issue. And it doesn't work in stream health assessment either. So where did this come from, this Colorado Stream Health Assessment Framework? Well, as it turns out, there's another program that also needs comprehensive health assessment, and that's the 404 Clean Water Act. And so starting back, it's amazing now, but starting back way in the 1990s, I began a long-term program, academic research program, developing tools for the Clean Water Act. One of the things, in this case, we began with wetland health assessment, moved on to watershed health assessment relative to the wetland. And this is one of the few instances where wetland technology actually preceded stream technology. But lo and behold, 2015, we finally got to it, and we developed the FACT stream, or the Functional Assessment of Colorado Streams. Now, right around 2015, when we were just finalizing it, an amazing thing happened. We started getting all these calls and demand to apply the FACT stream. But what was interesting and amazing is that none of the applications that we were getting asked to perform were actually regulatory in nature. They all had to do with different facets of stream management. Around the same time, you can see two really important projects came up insofar as the development of the Colorado Stream Health Assessment Framework. The first one was the Crystal River Management Plan, and for me, what this really showed was how the results of FACTStream, the Functional Assessment of Colorado Streams, could be used in stakeholder outreach, education, and decision-making. I'm not going to say anything more about the Crystal River Plan because Seth and Julie are going to be talking about that on the 22nd. But I will say a little bit more about the City of Fort Collins River Health Assessment Framework. This was the real pivotal project in developing the Colorado Stream Health Assessment Framework. In this project, we had an outstanding, a really crack team, PhD geomorphologists, we had water quality experts, we had biologists and river ecologists, outstanding. We had all of those subdisciplines covered well. And in this project, what we did was we really deconstructed the FACTStream and then reassembled it to meet the needs of the city and take into account the particular circumstances of the Poudre and the resources of the city of Fort Collins and the ability of the city. What we learned from the River Health Assessment Framework is really how to modify the generalized framework of the Colorado Stream Health Assessment Framework to meet the needs of individual entities. And this is basically where we are right now. We're putting together the final documentation on this process as well as the generalized framework. And in the case of the Cashel Poudre in the city of Fort Collins, it's really neat because we have the opportunity of getting most of the original study team back together with the addition of our colleagues at Oak Tech. And we have the opportunity to go out and actually apply it, tweak it in some cases, but to actually see it in operation. And that's been a really super rewarding process. So this is the end of my time, and I'm just going to turn over the phone to Mark, and he's going to start to get into some of the details of the Colorado Stream Health Assessment Framework. Thank you.
Thanks, Brad, and thanks to everybody. My goal in this part of the talk is to actually show you the Colorado Stream Health Assessment Framework. Keep in mind it's a tool. I'm going to show you how the tool works and how we're applying it in planning. So let's start with this model that Brad showed you. This is a model of a healthy stream. As he said, it's a complex system. It's made up of these 10 core drivers that interact in all directions and at all levels. The foundation of the Colorado framework is these 10 variables, and each variable represents one of the core drivers. The variables are in the assessment. To do an assessment, what you're doing is you're rating each of these variables on the degree of impairment or the degree of departure from reference condition. So each one basically gets its own little health score. These are combined then to give an overall health score for a reach. So final score. Each variable is basically rated on a very general grading scale like this, and we use the academic grading scale A through F because it very conveniently conveys our meaning. Each variable actually is its own sort of suite of complex interacting processes. In order to break that down further and to make this more doable, each variable is defined by a set of subvariables. And these can be, we have recommended ones, but these can be selected and chosen to fit the needs of each system, the system that you're working in. Subvariables are defined by a much more specific set of scoring guidelines. And this is where the parameters, the measurements, the modeling results, the things that you measure apply to the framework through subvariables. So this is the framework. I just showed you the framework. It's basically the place to plug in all your data, and its purpose, the whole purpose of this whole thing, is to ensure that the assessment that you do is comprehensive, that it's holistic, and that it results in an effective communication tool. So when you apply everything, you get a neat little house. So the summary, the communication part, the results are displayed in this report card format, and it's a format that's very easy to understand and conveys a lot of information in a very clear and concise way. And here's an actual one, and this is what usually happens. They usually get all A's, but here's what a report card is. Each variable, each core driver of the system is rated on an 8th scale. The report card that I'm showing you is from a particular reach of the Poudre River. This is one reach of about 550 so far, I think, that we've used this framework on. Selected kind of at random. This slide shows the level of effort that was put into each variable score. So, as Brad mentioned, the framework allows you to approach each variable at a level of effort appropriate. And this is important because if we're actually going to accomplish all this stream management planning, and if we're going to do health assessments on all the reaches of 80% of the rivers that 80% of the priority streams in the state next few years, we can't measure everything, and we need to be very judicious and efficient in the information we collect and how we use it. Now I want to show you and give you an example of what one of these variable scores. I'm going to break down one of these variable scores and show where it came from. So as an example, let's look at the flow regime score for that particular reach. Flow regime was rated using 3 subvariables: peak flows, rate of change, and base flows. And flow regime is really just it's a description of the water coming into the site. Peak flows, this is an example kind of the type of data that feeds it. So these are that big black arrow that was on the right. That's the data that would feed a subvariable score. For peak flows, you're evaluating based on the height of peaks and the duration of peaks. Rate of change, this variable also uses a similar type of data. And the neat thing about this kind of data is these hydrograph data they're really detailed, they're really quantitative, and they're super easy to get because, well, mostly because of the USGS and the state maintaining these gauges for us. Anyway, rate of change uses the same type of data, but at a different scale. So you can see this was just an example from a couple of days ago. You can see where the water level dropped off really quickly on the Poudre due to a diversion. And finally, base flows, similar types of data, but summarized in creative ways to get good assessments of impairment to base flow. This data comes from modeling, point flow modeling data, showing the number of days per year on average that the river goes below a certain flow. And just as an example, this is why we use subvariables to rate variables. You can now get into the weeds a little bit more and define really more specific criteria for each grading category. So it tells you what an A means, what a B means, what a C, D, and F all mean. Then the scores are combined. to give an overall rating for flow regime. So basically you can take your report card and work backwards through each variable into subvariables and then into the actual data if you want to get more detail. As another example, the riparian condition grade, this reach received a C, and the C came from a compilation of subvariable data, just like the flow regime one did. In this case, the entire riparian area was mapped into patches, and each discrete patch was evaluated using 11 subvariables, each with specific grading criteria. Then those are weight averaged over the entire area for the reach to give the final C score. So that's kind of how it works. Now, where does the overall health score, where does that come from? Well, it's a combination of all of the variable scores. And the way that we arrive at that, there's no perfect way to combine all these. The method that the Colorado Stream Health Assessment Framework uses is to do a weighted average of variables, and the weightings, and this drawing I have up here shows the length of the bar shows the weight of each variable. And those were derived by analyzing for each variable how often and how much it affects other variables. So it's basically a measure of how important it is. It's weird because I can't ask you if you're following along, and I can't see anybody nodding heads. All I see is little IP addresses out there. I hope this is all making sense. So you get that overall health score, and we can start doing that over all these reaches. And for the Pooter, just here's an example of all the reaches looked at together. You end up with a big database of reaches by variable score and overall health score, and then you can map those health scores over an entire drainage or study area or any landscape level. And this is useful for prioritizing sites even. That's what we just did in Park County. For example, we were hired by Park County to evaluate all of the streams there, which ended up being 451 reaches that we did over 3 years. And they're using the results to prioritize areas for conservation and restoration. Obviously, at that level, we measured a lot of things, but we didn't measure a lot of things in a lot of places. I just walked you through, really briefly, how the Stream Health Assessment Framework works. So we kind of, so far we've only gotten this far in the diagram. The next thing I'm going to talk to you a little bit about is just how the framework helps us through the body of this. We kind of call this diagram the star man. He looks like a star man. So we're going to go right through his belly now and show how the framework can help us through these processes. So the purpose, what we're doing through those stages is coming up with alternatives and evaluating them. This slide represents, basically, here's what you have is a health score for a reach, and these in the middle are all these alternatives. These are our main options for how we can manage stream health. So what we can do is evaluate the effects of any one of these actions and see how they can change the variable scores. To do that, we need to understand something about not just the level of health and the degree of impairment, but the causes of impairment. And the health assessment framework is set up to do that, because when you evaluate these variables, one of the things you do is describe the causes, describe the human impacts that are affecting health. In this case, this is sort of a mock-up of what we would do for that reach that I used as an example on the Pooter. The dark areas, the shaded areas, well, basically here, let me tell you what you're looking at. On the left side that's our report card. That's our list of variables and the variable scores. That's degree of impairment. The causes of impairment are these human impacts, or we call them stressors. So the matrix sets up which stressors affect which variables. So diversions obviously affect flow regime. And then down at the bottom, we can tally it all up and see what the major impacts are. So we're looking at here, we highlighted on the impacts of diversions on overall health and transbasin diversions. Could this be an opportunity for water management to improve health? The next block of kind of darkness is the effects of levees and channelization that occurred on this reach. This stuff is important. This river engineering was all done for a reason, and there are limits to what you can do, but perhaps there's opportunities where some of this could be removed and restored to give the river some room. So those seem like the best options on this particular reach. So let's just do a hypothetical example. This is trying to show how this framework can guide us through this planning process. So hypothetically, let's look at what water management can do. Now the little smiley faces on the left, those show which variables can be affected by a hypothetical water management plan. Flow regime, maybe a little bit of water chemistry, and of course these all depend very specifically on the interactions going on within these variables. We use the tool then to predict what the final scores might be under a given scenario. So we're showing in this case, perhaps we can get some gain up here. The main gain is to this variable, and then we predict maybe some smaller gains here. These now become our targets or our goals. Well, we maybe think we can get from a C+ to a B- in this hypothetical case. Not bad. But let's think bigger. Now let's treat that other block of impairment. If there's opportunities for land management or restoration, we can add those in now and see what our predicted outcomes might be. So we've now moved through identifying alternatives and evaluating the potential outcomes. Next phase is monitoring. Assuming we came up with that plan, we want to implement some water management on this reach. We want to implement some land management and restoration. We're kind of making some bold promises here that we're going to improve flow regime, we're going to improve riparian condition, we're going to improve resilience. Those are the main variables that get affected in this scenario. In this step, the framework helps us define a logical and efficient monitoring plan by identifying which parameters are important to monitor. It should start with those that represent parameters that represent variables that were the most affected. And for long-term monitoring, we need to work all the way back into the specifics, the specific parameters, and measure real quantitative things to prove this change up, to prove that we've actually made things better. And if not, we go to adaptive management and try again. You might spend a little bit less effort on some of the variables that we predict to change a little bit, and then even less effort, or maybe none at all, on some of these variables that may or may not change, or that we don't predict to change. Essentially, the target scores are objectives. We're hoping, or our next challenge with the framework is to apply it or see if it can be helpful in application for monitoring a whole big project, the Colorado EWP, the flood recovery projects. There's 72 of them, and we want to get some monitoring data on those as they go in. So the challenge there is going to be doing this effectively and efficiently with a very small amount of resources, and actually getting some real data and some real results that will prove whether or not these efforts are improving health. That brings us to the end of the formal talk, and we did leave a good amount of time for some questions for you. But first, I want to give some thanks to all these people on the left: CSU, CWCB, Colorado State Land Board, CDOT, Parks and Wildlife, City of Fort Collins, especially the RAF team, the EPA, Corps of Engineers, Colorado Riparian Association. All these efforts, all these people have helped us along the way in building this and promoting it and partnering with us to make it better. CNHP, LODIC, Acclivity, OTEC, and our partners Jessica and Dave at Ecometrics. I encourage you to visit. We're going to try to get this all up and make it available to everybody that wants to use it. So we set up a website, and hopefully one day soon we'll have all this data there. We encourage you to visit that if you want to learn more. Thank you. I'll turn it back over to Abby here, and
fantastic.
Look forward to your questions.
Absolutely. Thank you both, Brad and Mark, for just a great job going through. Really appreciate it. And we do have a number of questions. As you have been presenting, I'm just going to start dropping them off, and we'll see how much time we have. We'll try to end right at about 1 o'clock for folks for your scheduling needs. And so first question I have is from Kevin, and he would like to know, how did you break the stream into reaches? And I believe that's when you were discussing with the Poudre River.
It's kind of an iterative process. We started with real obvious geomorphic breaks, and then in the process of going through it, we moved those. We actually ended up with 99 subreaches and that got rated. So basically, as you're doing the evaluation, anytime you come to a point where any variable changes significantly, you've got to make a break. So really, a reach is meant to represent a homogeneous section of stream where all the scores are the same. Hopefully that helps. You also need to break it up by stream type and process domain. So hopefully that helps. Follow up, let me know.
Sounds good. I've got another question here that just came in from Lynn, and asking, how have you been able to access stream reaches that are privately owned?
That is a really good question, and that's the flexibility of this method for allowing sort of level 1 assessment efforts is actually critical in these cases, because you aren't going to access all these areas. You've got to make inferences from nearby reaches. You can gain as much information as you can using aerials and things like that, but there are lots of parts of these streams we just can't go to and can't put our eyes on directly, and those are going to be assessed at level 1 and early level 2 using early level 1 and 2 methods. That's super good question. That happens every single assessment you do.
Certainly. I have another question here from Melinda, and she'd like if you could explain a little more about the difference between resilience and reach condition. So could you expand a little bit on that?
Yeah, reach condition is a bigger topic. Resilience, the way we look at resilience is one component of its health. Resilience, by definition, is its ability to recover after a major disturbance. It's a tough one because the word resilience is used so colloquially lately, especially in the last 2 years. It's oftentimes used as a replacement for health, or a replacement for, almost a replacement for good. So we're trying to keep to a stricter definition, at least when I use it, as its ability to recover. So it's actually, it is a specific variable in there. It's related to stability of the system. And it's evaluated by looking at really channel migration zone, whether the river has room to move if it's assaulted with a big flood or a big event like a fire, and its ability to recover vegetatively if parent materials are nearby. So that's another really good question. That word resilience is a tough one.
Yes, definitely. No, thanks. That's a great answer. I'm going to kind of combine a few questions here. Lots of folks have been asking about how much this assessment costs per reach, and about how much time would be involved. Could you talk a little bit about cost and time for doing the assessment, and maybe even if you have any information about with stream management plans, but I guess that might be probably a little more towards the 22nd webinar, but anything you have on cost and time involved?
This is Brad. I'll field this one, and it all depends with the Colorado Stream Health Assessment Framework. It all depends on the resources that are available. Of course, there's some minimal cost that has to go in, but for instance, when Mark was talking about the South Park inventory, 561 reaches. Those were done at a very low intensity, mostly desktop exercise with ground truthing. There was some level 2 on the ground kind of operations, but it can be custom tailored to whatever the needs and abilities of the entity looking to do the evaluation. And that's the real key with this, with being able to incorporate many different types or intensities of data. So it could be extremely inexpensive to evaluate a reach on the cost, even like $100 if that is what is required to answer the question. One of the things with assessment is that there's always a trade-off between intensity of assessment and rapidness of assessment and the amount of uncertainty that's associated with that assessment. And so what the stream managers need to do and the project managers need to do is to determine what is an acceptable level of trade-off. Some projects, small streams or small segments of streams, can be evaluated very intensely at a relatively high cost. Other large regional studies like the South Park study or the Park County study can be low intensity. And I'll cut that there unless there's follow-up questions.
Mm-hmm. No, that's terrific. Thank you. I've had a couple questions come in about how this framework may be applicable on larger river systems. Some examples have been given, maybe for the upper Colorado, Colorado main stem itself, and possibly the Green Rivers. Could you comment a little bit on the applicability at this larger scale?
Absolutely. This is Brad again. And they're completely applicable because the same fundamental drivers drive the health of small streams and large rivers. They all have geomorphology. They all have flow regimes. They all have water quality. So it's 100% adaptable to any sort of river or stream or creek situation. It's mainly a matter of the group of experts coming together, taking the generalized framework and tweaking it to the circumstances of their particular river. So for instance, on the Colorado River, maybe there's specific water quality parameters that would be appropriate to include into those scoring guidelines. And so it can be customized to meet whatever circumstances is required.
Great. Thank you. I've got another great question here from Patrick, and he's asking, what is the suggested frequency of assessments? Annual, 3 to 5 years? What's the best time frame?
Again, I would say this absolutely depends on the purpose. And I don't mean to be evasive in these kinds of questions, but it's just in response to the very different circumstances and situations that arise in this kind of these stream management questions. With the city of Fort Collins right now, what we're talking about is going back and redoing the state of the pooter is what we're calling it, but redoing that work every 3 to 5 years, perhaps. It hasn't been set in stone by any degree, but in large areas, you want to be able to detect some change, or else it seems like that's basically wasting your money. And so you have to look at the area, and if it's an area of very rapid development, then annually could be an appropriate time frame. In most situations, I'd suggest that every 3 to 5 years is probably more realistic and more efficient usage of funds. But again, situation dependent.
Very good. Very good. Thank you. I've got another question kind of relating to this time interval, and Gina is referencing how the framework might be used, and it sounds like you've just kind of alluded to this, so it's a nice segue. In the light of climate change and increasing stream temperatures, the assessment framework, addressing temperature, aquatic ecology. So I guess again, looking at that frequency, did you have any applications within climate change kind of frames as you were considering this framework?
A little bit. These questions are getting a little more toward ambient monitoring. So the framework would be used to define which variables, which subvariables, and then which parameters are really important or useful to monitor to gauge impacts of these large-scale things you're talking about, like climate change. That's really where the framework would be applied. And I mean, as far as the time frame for monitoring things like water temperature effects from climate change or flow effects from climate change, those I think those are pretty long-scale things that you would monitor on a 5 to 10 year basis.
And this is going to add one thing in real quick. I think the framework works extremely well for tracking things like climate change potentially, and again, like Mark was saying, the sampling horizon could vary depending, of course, on the rapidness of the response in the climate. But the key here is making the connection between changes in parameters such as stream water temperature and climate change, because there can be many confounding factors that drive it. And that's with anything. That's not just with our framework. And I think that's a crux that the scientists involved need to wrestle with.
Certainly. No, terrific answer. I know we're running very short on time. I would like to make sure, folks, if we haven't been able to get to your questions, that you reach out to one of us. Our emails are on your screen here. I've had a lot of questions, and folks are very excited about the fact that this information will be up on the streamhealthassessment.com website. And is that website up and running now for folks to reference, after this presentation becoming?
It's just got a placeholder right now, and this is kind of embarrassing, but it's actually streamhealthassessment.net, not .com.
Very good.
You can also, it should be up. It'll be probably a couple of months till we have some real good information on there. Okay. But so keep checking back. That's the real address, not the one I have on there.
Absolutely. And folks, also, if you've been on the webinar today, that I will provide you a link to the recording. So we will have that available, and I'll make sure that that correct website address is on there. And I'd like to thank everyone, certainly for their time, and I want to particularly thank both Mark and Brad for all of their work in preparing for this excellent webinar. and for their work on behalf of freshwater systems. And I'd like to extend an invitation to you, if you are not already a member of Audubon's Western Rivers Action Network, to join. It's a great way to stay informed on future webinars, on collaborative engagement opportunities, volunteer on the ground wetland and riparian restoration projects, and much more. And so next up, we have our stream management planning webinar, our last installment for the spring on March 22nd. The stream management planning series will wrap up on the 22nd for merging science and stakeholder involvement to support river health and community needs with the presenters, Seth Mason of Lodick Hydrological, Julie Baxter of Acclivity Associates, and Mark, again, from Ecometrics. And last but not least, I want to thank you for sharing your lunch hour with us, and we hope you found this information useful. And as always, there's much more to come. So thank you again, Mark and Brad, and we hope you all join us again soon, and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, Abby. Thanks, everybody.